You had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday. Time for another installment of Cello Chat. And with me today, I'm thrilled to have Daniel Ketter. Daniel, how are you doing today?
Doing great. It's kind of a rainy day, but really happy to be chatting with you.
Terrific. I'm looking forward to this very much myself. Let's start, if you will, by telling the audience about your musical background and how you got started even.
Sure. So getting started, the family story is that I was in our minivan and listening to the radio and asked my mom what a certain sound was on the radio. And she said that it was a cello. And that was how I started playing. But I think the real story, the way that I remember it, is that my older brother, we had both been playing piano sort of half-heartedly, and he had started playing clarinet in the school band. And I was really jealous. I wanted to also play another instrument. So I think I was primed for looking for something. So sibling relationships go a long way. But when I was growing up, I played chamber music with my mom and my brother. My older brother plays oboe, and my mom is a flutist. And so I know a lot of the Baroque trio sonata repertoire and a lot of the classical divertimento, some of them by memory. I think I could play some of the Haydn London trios without even looking at music, just because I did it a lot between the ages of 12 and 18.
Nice.
After that, I went to Eastman School of Music to study with Alan Harris and did a master's degree at Peabody with Alison Wells, who's now in Scotland at the Royal Conservatory, and then went back to Eastman for a DMA, again with Alan Harris.
Outstanding. And now you are back in your back in your home state of Missouri.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I grew up on the Kansas side of Kansas City, but
okay.
both my parents are from Missouri, and I have a lot of family in this area. I was hired in 2018 to be assistant professor at Missouri State University, where I teach cello and chamber music and music theory.
Great. You know, Kansas City just has enough, it's mostly in Missouri, but I didn't know whether it was the Kansas side or the Missouri side. Great. So now you have a lot going on, as do many of the guests I've talked about, and we're going to have a full agenda because you have in just the performing side and the theory side, but I don't want to forget to get to the question I ask everybody, which is about that key ingredient of motivation to practice, kind of helping students, and this can be either on the bigger scale, even a student who otherwise is practicing but could be practicing more, and to instill an actual love of the process of practicing, or kind of on the more smaller scale of just those times that they hit some sort of a wall or just get a little bit burned out. What are some of your favorite tools in the toolbox for addressing motivation to practice?
A couple things come to mind. One is a joke that I tell my students pretty often. It's actually not a joke, it's just a true statement, but it ends up having the structure of a joke because it's not usually what people expect. When I ask students, what's the most important thing about about a recital? When you're getting ready for a recital, what's the very, very most important thing? Do you have an idea about what you would tell a student the most important thing would be?
Boy, there's several contenders, but I'm trying to solve it as a joke.
The thing that students usually say is, practicing hard, picking the right repertoire, but the answer is always setting a date. Okay. Because when you have a date for the recital, if you don't have a date, it doesn't happen. And if you have a date, then you can start, turning up the temperature. Like things that you can't imagine would be possible are possible when you have a goal. And I think it's really important for students to frequently have goal opportunities, things to get ready to play for, whether it's studio class, whether it's playing for each other, whether it's playing for a chamber music recital. It's really important that when I, coach chamber music, that I always make sure that there are several performances available and the ability to have multiple performances, especially just because that's such an important part of the learning process. But finding goals and setting dates for goals, I think it allows you to turn up the temperature in terms of your preparation. You are like able to start doing things that maybe you couldn't imagine that you could do. And different levels of pressure. I mean, sometimes it's just like playing for a friend, sometimes it's a jury, sometimes it's a half recital, sometimes it's a full recital or an audition. But when you turn up the temperature, you bake the cake. And if the temperature doesn't get turned up, sometimes the cake doesn't really get baked. And I've experienced that myself too. It's like, oh, I really want to learn this piece, or I really want to do this thing. And if I don't have a performance opportunity set up, it just kind of floats in the ether for a while. So that's one thing. When I'm working with students, one thing that I think is really important that I try to do is to make sure that they know when they're doing a good job, when they're doing good work. I feel like that's really important for some students to understand, even if they're not where they want to be. It's really important that they're getting good feedback, that they're working well. And a part of that is helping them to trust the practice process and the learning process that they're going through. Because I know it can be really frustrating to be a student as you are maybe spending hours practicing every day, or 30 minutes, or whatever kind of student you are. It seems like that there's this like huge gulf between where you are and where you want to be. And it's interesting, as a professional, that really doesn't go away. The distance between like where you are and where you want to be, it never really gets finished. So I think it's really important that people get good feedback when they're working, and that they have really specific ideas about what they can do to get better. Like more and more as I teach, I spend a lot of time talking about how to practice and specific kinds of exercises, and talk about practice plans, and making sure that we have really, again, goal setting. I've started with my students doing videos, like demonstration videos, maybe once every 2 weeks or once a month, of different technical routines or exercises. And I found that even that kind of goal setting can be really helpful, just with giving, there's a moment when it can be done, there's a moment to work towards, and there's sort of a finished product instead of music that just sort of like floats off in the ether. The last thing that is sort of coming to mind in terms of motivating students is it's really important to me to work with students to find out what they're interested in and to help them develop their interests. So I have some students, it has clearly been very meaningful to them that I have helped find different kinds of repertoire or different styles of music that they're really excited about. Several students have had a really great time working on some contemporary cello techniques, sort of like Mike Block's Contemporary Cello Etude book. There have been several that it just has really lit a spark for them to start thinking about how to play music in maybe a more contemporary, popular, or mixed style. Other students have been very, very motivated by some repertoire research projects that we've done in the studio. And it's been very interesting to me to see how much that impacts a student's motivation to practice getting ready for a recital or for a lesson or something like that. I had a student who recently did a great performance of Ethel Smythe's E minor sonata, which I've been sort of explaining to students that this, you could think about this piece as like another version of the Brahms E minor sonata. It's really closely related. It's her A minor sonata. I'm sorry, I was mixing up the keys. It was really meaningful to me to see this student really connecting with the piece and feeling very motivated and feeling proud about talking about it with friends, and proud talking at her recital about this piece. It was clearly very motivating for her to be able to feel connected to the repertoire. Like it was a part of a choice that she was making in terms of what she wanted to play. And it was something that she felt really motivated to teach people about. Yeah, and I think that this question of repertoire is just very important for a lot of students today, being able to feel involved in the music that they're playing. And there are lots of different ways that I have been trying to help students feel more connected to the music that they're playing.
Terrific. Yeah, it's the Romberg. It's like the Brahms, but also in E minor, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, I just, that's very thorough answer. And no, and I really like it too. I like it just like, because for your first point, when we run across a bunch of people who they know about themselves that they can't get themselves to practice unless they have something coming up. And so, well, in that case, always make sure that you've got something coming up and keep scheduling things so that you keep practicing. And then another thing, I mean, pointing out, for example, to your students that, hey, even when you've been playing for decades, we still have this, kind of this list of things that we want to improve on. And there too, I think it's a combination of the fact that you do over time get to be better and better at the process of practicing efficiently and really going straight to what needs to be done. So you accomplish more per unit time. I like the emphasis on practicing efficiently, but I think also we get, not recently, I think a while ago, you start to get a more realistic expectation of how long it takes to accomplish something, because for some of them, they think, okay, I understand, I'm going to have to practice it. Okay, I did it twice. How come I can't do it? Just that realization that, and then do that same thing the next day, and then build on that the next day, and the trajectory is not necessarily what they're initially expecting in every case. And then also to that last point, I would say, from my perspective at least, particularly when they're younger, in the earlier stages, to find repertoire that really grabs them. And then hopefully after a certain point, they'll get to where they are then able to motivate themselves enough that when they have to play a piece that they don't really like, they'll still be able to do it and perform it as though they like the piece.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely very important. Although there are, playing in orchestra and playing for gigs and playing for all kinds of things, there's no shortage of opportunities to play things that you don't really like.
I know. Yeah, but we just do our best to represent.
Uh-huh.
All right, now you have a whole lot of things going on, and it's clear that you don't in any way compartmentalize the theory world and the performing world. I like that those are able to inform each other, and maybe even I'd like to start with that is your theoretical work in terms of the structure of music and the Schenkerian basis, and how you've tied that to, among other things, the repertoire that is more dear to cellists than anything else, the Bach suites. You want to talk about how that, what you've done along those lines and how that came about?
Sure. Well, like many or most cellists playing Bach suites, I spent a lot of time in lessons and outside of lessons reading, trying to understand how they work. I felt a real connection to them and a real curiosity about them. Admittedly, a part of that curiosity is because of how sort of adored they are by the entire community. And when everyone says that this thing is so amazing, you find yourself wanting to, I want to understand why. I need to understand sort of like what this is and why people care about it so much. And there are obviously lots of really great reasons, including the fact that, I've been really motivated to learn and play a lot of solo cello repertoire over time. In particular, I have a memory of going home one summer from school and, family members saying like, can you play something for us that you've been working on? And I was thinking like, well, I just had this sonata and this concerto, and like, I can't really play this for you. It's just really important, I think, as an instrumentalist, to have things that you can just have music that you can play, even when you're by yourself. So I spent, a lot of time trying to think about how the suites worked. And I remember that there was an issue that kind of nagged at me when I was a student, which is that everybody said that the Bach suites were made out of multiple voices, but it's really difficult to explain what that actually means for a person that likes to see all the details and look under the hood. And historically, there's been a lot of different interpretations as to what that means, which is also pretty interesting to think about. I remember that I was playing the fourth suite prelude once, and I kept getting feedback from my teacher, from somebody else that I played it for friends, something to the effect of like, okay, it sounds good, but I can't really hear the voices. At least that's like the feedback that I was getting back, because I don't hear the voice leading. And that really bothered me at the time, a time when I was really dogged about getting down to the bottom of everything. This is as an undergrad. And I remember just deciding that for this fourth suite prelude, that it was pretty easy to think about what the voices were. I mean, it's you can look at the notes and see something that looks a lot like a four-voice chorale texture. And so I just wrote out what looked to me like the four-voice chorale texture and quadruple tracked myself playing through it in my bedroom and practiced it for a while, sort of with this background chorale texture. And it really made it feel very different. Actually, even just recording the chorale made it feel really different, because as you're playing the harmonies, certain harmonies you want to shape towards other ones. You have like leading bars, like weak bars that lead to strong bars, and like tense chords or dominant chords that lead to others, or you can really feel the direction of a scale.
Or the suspension.
Yeah, exactly. And these kinds of things that are significantly harder to be aware of when you're only playing one note at a time that's sort of not in maybe a more familiar harmonic context. So that by itself was a really interesting experiment and gave me just a lot of information. I was not a music theorist at that point in time. I did not identify as a music theorist when I went and did my master's degree at Peabody. I did not identify as a music theorist when I started my DMA at Eastman again. But I was hired when I went back to the DMA to teach music theory as a teaching assistant, as just a part of my graduate assistantship. And so I was teaching music theory classes. I was hired because I was familiar with the curriculum and had, expressed a lot of curiosity and interest in music theory as an undergrad, and built some connections with some of the theory faculty. But I very quickly was interested in taking some of the PhD level theory classes during that period. And interestingly, I had never really, until taking those classes, understood what professional music theorists do, which is a lot of writing papers and developing systems for analyzing things and comparing different kinds of repertoire and coming up with new explanations for how stuff works, whether they're sort of mathematical or historical, or lots of different kinds of ways that they do that. As many as you can imagine, people kind of go for it. Philosophical. Right. And I think I just found that to be really motivating at that time in my life. I really connected with it. And actually, I ended up getting a PhD in music theory, but the reason why I applied for the program is because I was taking a lot of music theory classes and teaching music theory classes. So I was doing a lot of the same things that the PhD music theory students did, but actually their financial aid packages were a lot better. And so, I like to joke with people that I got into music theory for the money, but really it would have been impossible to get through the program if I wasn't really deeply interested in it. But it was not something that I really ever expected to do until I was sort of already doing it and really engrossed in it and really enjoying it. And now my dissertation topic was on the theory of voice leading by Heinrich Schenker.
Mhm.
And one thing, sort of through line, I guess, with my theoretical interest was, again, this idea of like, what is a musical voice? And something that always kind of bothered me a little bit about Schenker is that it is a theory of voice leading, but Schenker or many other, scholars after Schenker, none of them, to my satisfaction, had really been able to define for me what a musical voice was within this theory. So it's a theory of voice leading, but it often doesn't answer questions like how many voices are there? Like most Schenker graphs, they look at them, they call them reductions, and they might sometimes have one voice or two. Usually not one voice, but there might be one note that might be active at a certain time. But a lot of these analyses are an outer voice framework. It'll show like just two sort of really important active voices, and the rest are filler. And that doesn't really answer the kinds of questions that I was really interested in for my time quadruple tracking Bach suites in my bedroom as an undergrad. So my dissertation topic was trying to, within this theory, define what a essential voice is, different properties that voices have, and kind of grounding that in different fundamental elements of Schenker's theory. And it turns out, if I give the short version, is that a musical voice is really probably best described by the practice of therabass in the Baroque era, which is how they thought about harmony rather than Roman numerals or even some sort of, figured bass is a part of therabass, but the therabass discipline is uniformly a four-voice discipline. Whenever people are writing out therabass examples, like in CPE Bach's The Art of Keyboard Playing and Accompaniment, like every single example that's written out when people are talking about therabass is always in four voices. And I think that at least for that repertoire, is a really appropriate way to end up looking at how the Baroque music works. Anyway, I maybe kind of went off the deep end there, but
No, I love it. And it's just back to the Bach suites for a moment. I'm probably familiar with the Alan Winold 2-volume. That's a really well done contribution. And then the somewhat curious, the Werner Mifune edition, where the notes are either black or blue, where he's kind of tried to divide everything into at least two voices of compound melody. Have you seen that one as well?
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever had a cello student who's fully agreed with where he draws the line. But the thought process of thinking in those terms is definitely very valuable exercise.
Yeah, Ernst Kurth is another music theorist that was actually a contemporary of Schenker that talked about apparent voices. For him, it was more of he actually said that they don't really rise to the level of actual voices, or very rarely do, and it's sort of an illusion. And Schenker actually wrote about Kurth's analyses of this. And what was really interesting to me is that Schenker's objection to it was similar to kind of mine as I was reading through the Kurth, which is that Kurth, says that you can find these different kinds of connections, but you should be really creative with the kinds of connections that you might find. So there's not necessarily like one way to do it. And the problem with that for me is that it doesn't tell you how it might have been written, like why they might have decided to write it one way and not another way. I mean, there are creative ways of hearing, but I think that there are very specific musical effects and like a specific musical grammar that would make it work out this way and not another way. So I think that the definiteness of really trying to find kind of a voice leading framework that works according to certain kinds of musical principles to justify one hearing versus another hearing. Not that there is only one hearing that's available, but having some principles for how they're supposed to be constructed, I think, is really important for me as a performer and as a listener.
Excellent. Now, would you next talk about your cello teaching repertoire consortium.
So I mentioned that repertoire can be really motivating for students. I think many teachers have expressed in conversations, that they wish that we had more contemporary music for students to be able to play. I immediately think about what are the pieces that I grab when a student has a problem with this kind of issue, or what kind of first concerto would I give to a student that would really kind of challenge them at an intermediate level, but maybe not give them problems that they can't solve. So, picking, repertoire that really fits a student's level is a very common thing that teachers think about all the time. I'm sure that you've assigned students some of the Gulcherman Concerti or the Klingle Concertino or a lot of these different student pieces. Every cellist plays the Fare Elegy. A lot of them play Allegro Appassionato. Everybody plays the Swan. And, if you go through this list of pieces that are sort of like standby workhorse teaching pieces, they're almost all written over 100 years ago, and a huge number of them are written by, like a lot of the most effective ones are written by cellist composers and pedagogues. So people that have a real deep understanding of how the instrument works, what kinds of things are appropriate to write, for a student cellist that will, fit comfortably under the hand, but how can we turn up the temperature a little bit so that they, for a given level, that it will still provide something challenging and something that can be satisfying. And there's not actually a lot of that available today. I mean, a lot of contemporary composition has a reputation for being prestige composition. Composers really like to write things that are very virtuosic for professional performers that they're working with, or things that require like really non-idiomatic challenges that are frankly not appropriate to give to students, or pieces that might be at an intermediate student's level. Maybe they might only challenge a student in terms of interpretation or like exploring a different sound world or something like that, but not something that will get them to spin their wheels the way that a Gulcherman concerto or a Klingle concertino will, or the way that Allegro Appassionato, it's written as a teaching piece. You get a little excerpt and you get to do it twice, and the whole thing is it's written very obviously for student edification. Or we're going to try a little this technique, and as a person who really cares about new music, and I spent a lot of time working with composers to commission music and to learn about a lot of contemporary cello repertoire, I just had this light bulb moment that what I would like to do is to ask cellists that have a really deep understanding of how the cello works and how pedagogy works to write pieces, sort of the way that Popper wrote pieces and Klingle wrote pieces and Gulcherman wrote pieces that are targeted at a particular level, so that I can do two things. One is have more pieces that I'm really excited about giving to my students that will challenge them and help them grow, but not in non-idiomatic ways. Mm-hmm. And to also help them understand the value and the excitement and of being involved in a living music tradition, something that's been really motivating for me, which is developing real friendships and relationships with composers and playing their music. I gave a recital back in February there were two premieres, and I played one of the CTRC pieces from last year. Oh, I played both of the CTRC pieces from last year and then two other premieres. And this was the first recital that I've done that was of all music by like really close friends of mine, people that I know really well. And it's just so satisfying to play music by friends that you really like and that you really want to share with people. And I want my students to be able to experience that also. Or running it as a consortium, in particular because there's a structural problem with commissioning new music, which is that a lot of the time when you commission music, you might be the only person that plays it. It's really hard to, it's something that's difficult for composers to write pieces and then figure out how to get them distributed to more people. And my wife is a part of an organization called the Flute New Music Consortium, which is an organization that every year commissions new music for flute professionals, and people pay a membership fee that goes towards commissioning a different piece that they can play, and then they all co-premiere the piece. And this is a really great deal both for the performers and for the composers, because the composers get a lot of people to play their music instead of just one for a commission. And also the performers get to premiere a piece and get to commission a piece with a very minimal buy-in. So it's just, I think, a really great model for trying to kickstart getting some new music that's written for professionals, or in this case, for students, because I think a lot of teachers that I've talked to are interested in finding different kinds of pieces for their students, and they all have the same problems of like, oh, it's so hard to find good repertoire that fits my students' needs, and they don't have that big of a budget, so I can't just commission stuff. And I'm trying to solve that problem in this small way. So last year we commissioned 2 pieces, one by Curtis Stewart, who was nominated for a Grammy last year. That was very cool. He's the violinist of the Public Quartet, and he wrote an incredible piece for cello and piano called Lament. It is so much fun to play. I just can't recommend it enough. And it was very cool for my students to be able to, and many other cello students, to be able to work with him in some Zoom workshops on the piece. You know, they see in the news, like, Curtis Stewart's been nominated for a Grammy, and here he is teaching me a masterclass on a piece of music that he wrote that I'm one of the first, 20 people to play. That's just a really special experience for a lot of students, very motivating. Also, cellist Andrea Casarubios wrote us a piece called Silbo that is just an incredible concert piece. It is so much fun to play. If you have students that are working on some velocity playing and interested in false harmonics, it really nails those 2 things, I think, in a very achievable way.
All right.
It's a very, very effective piece. And I'm really excited because Thomas Mesa, who's a cello soloist that's traveling around a lot, is performing this piece, Silbo, that we commissioned, and is going to be putting it on an album soon. And I think that's also exciting for students to see, like, soloists and people that are traveling around playing pieces that, that they've played recently. So I have some students that played Silbo last year, and then they can see Thomas Mesa playing. It's like, wow, well, I played that. Like, this is, I think there's something really exciting about feeling connected to the living music tradition. And it's important to me to encourage the creation of music that I can get my students excited about.
That's great. Yeah, because it's certainly, our repertoire is really big for cello, and you can dig and find other things back from, whether it's Guillermo's time or Saint-Saëns, that would be an equivalent, but it does not at all address your issue of, but when you actually get to, you can correspond with the composer and, hey, why did you do this way or that way? It's a whole different feel, isn't it?
Yeah,
Nice.
and 50 or 100 years, like, it's interesting to think, will students still be playing Allegro Appassionato? Like, 50 years ago, there were teaching pieces that were really common that we don't use as much today.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to just accept that it always has to be the same, and it won't ever change if you don't encourage. I'm not saying that it has to change, but there was a reason why, Klengel and Guillermo and Grützmacher and all these, like, cellist composers, these virtuoso cellists and pedagogues, why they wrote music for their students. I mean, they were helping them to, engage with musical styles of the day. They were, it was also, there was no recorded music. So it was just much more normal, I think, to write music and play things that were written maybe within the last 50 years or 100 years or something, rather than exclusively playing music that was written 200 years ago. Anyway, so I just think that that's a really important part of the mix, and it's an absurd thought experiment, but in 200 years, are we going to have our students playing the same repertoire? I really hope not. I mean, I really like our repertoire. I'm not hating on the repertoire that we have. I mean, that's what I was trained on. That's what I really connect with. But I think it's really important also to me to help students understand that music is not just something that was written a while ago by people, but something that people still do today, and something that they can do also. That's been a really interesting thing about getting them in workshops, like master classes with the composers, is that, the composers talk about how they got into composing, which is, they're primarily string players. Why did they decide to compose? For Andrea and Curtis last year, it's because they did a lot of improvising and then sort of saw that as a way to start wanting to write music down. And what's especially interesting to me is that that's how all of our favorite historical composers were as well. They were almost primarily improvisers, like Bach, Mozart, Beethoven. I mean, these people were just monster improvisers. And anyway, it's really interesting.
Well, and now you are, like many cellists, into chamber music quite a bit. For some cellists, that can be the more traditional string quartet, piano trio, and you're definitely into those, but then segue also, or overlap with what you were just talking about, is a little bit more outside the box, this American Wild Ensemble. Not a wind ensemble, American Wild Ensemble. You want to talk a little bit about what that is and how that came to be?
Sure. I also play with a string quartet called the Opus 76 string quartet, and we play pretty much strictly classical music, which scratches a particular itch that I have as a person that has studied a lot of classical music. It's fun to have an opportunity to play it, and it's great to play with a string quartet. But the American Wild Ensemble is a group that I run with my spouse, and we almost exclusively commission new music that for certain kinds of occasions or certain kinds of locations. And we tend to organize performances that are in partnership with certain organizations, so that we can connect with communities surrounding those organizations, and maybe even communities that might surround or support certain locations. Our first tour that we did was in 2016. We commissioned 11 pieces with a National Endowment for the Arts grant, celebrating the 100-year anniversary of the National Park Service. And we played these pieces in 7 parks around the country. Our group is a septet. It's flute, clarinet, horn, violin, viola, cello, and percussion. So it's nice. There are 2 trios. There's like a wind side and a string side, and then it's almost like a little sinfonia or something like that. But so on this first tour, we commissioned a lot of our people that we knew, people that we were sort of connected with through maybe by 1 or 2 degrees through music at Eastman. We both had been really involved in performing new music while at Eastman and really cared about it, and we're really excited about commissioning some new pieces to celebrate the National Park Service. And again, it was really fun to play music by our friends and to advocate for this music, and to sort of be able to connect with audiences around the country about their love for the National Park Service. But there was something that I learned on this first tour as a student. I think everybody, to a certain point, many people have this assumption baked in, and a lot of audiences have this assumption baked in that new music is difficult to connect with for audiences. Audiences really like to listen to classical music, and that's something that philosophically that I just sort of abstractly thought, well, it doesn't have to be the case. But even getting ready for this tour, we had received these pieces. Some of them were very abstract, and as we were getting ready in rehearsals, I was, starting to get a little worried, like what's going to happen when we just go out to the middle of nowhere and people that, might have only come to this concert because they were camping that weekend and they saw that there was like a fireside event happening. They're going to come and they're going to hear some pretty abstract, maybe academic new music. Are they going to like it? I mean, as a student, I was kind of worried about this. And actually on that tour, I was really inspired and, to be honest, kind of shocked by how uniformly enthusiastic the response was of audiences. And that taught me some things that are really important about programming and about the power of new music and the importance of being able to communicate with your audience about the context that the music is written for. And, we found our formula with the American Wild Ensemble. It's not really a formula, but we tend to do kind of the same thing, is that we'll try to find maybe some kind of anniversary or some thing to celebrate, usually something with American identity, different locations, people, places, ideas in the country. When we really provide a lot of context for audiences in our performances, they have a lot of handles to connect to, a lot of ways to connect to the music. So, imagine you're listening to a pretty abstract piece of experimental music in a concert hall as a non-professional listener. It can be really alienating in a sort of sensory deprivation chamber. It's like, I don't understand what's going on here. I have any frame of reference. A lot of people feel alienated, and rightfully so. But you could take that same piece of music and tell people, oh, did you know this piece of music was actually written for the place that we're in right now, about, a hike that you might have gone on today. And, it's written about this thing that you really care about, the National Park Service. And suddenly that exact same listener is like, when they're listening, instead of thinking, oh, I feel really alienated, they think, oh, like that sounds a little bit like, the wind did maybe as I was turning this corner on my hike, or, it reminds me of this thing. It invites people to connect from a certain perspective, having a lot of context, including the purpose of the performance, the kinds of things you say, the place that you're playing, the reason why the piece was written. So some of the programmatic elements of music. And so we've really tried to experiment with programming and commissioning new music that can invite people in and help people to connect with contemporary music that's written specifically about things that they also care about, celebrating things that are important to them. So we've done several different projects for the last several years. We've done one celebrating the centennial of the 19th Amendment. We did one recently about the bicentennial of the state of Missouri. We did a tour around the state of Missouri with pieces and reflecting on the state's history. We went to Hawaii and worked with some composers in Hawaii about conservation efforts and particular natural landscape elements. One composer, Takuma Ito, really cares about endemic birds and wildlife, and he wrote us a piece called Adaptation Variations. He's been doing this project really trying to raise awareness of some endangered birds in Hawaii that are really very special. And so we playing this piece and trying to help him get this message out, and the people that we're playing the music for are like, wow, these are our birds. It's just it's a really special mix of things to use music to celebrate and connect with people. And that's kind of what we've been trying to do with American Wild Ensemble for a while.
Very cool. Now, let's see. I know you have a lot yet coming up in 2022. What are some of the highlights of upcoming projects and performances?
I have some continuing performances with my string quartet, Opus 76. It's a string quartet in Kansas City. I'm really, happy playing with this group because that's where I grew up, and it's really nice to be able to connect with the community doing that. We're in residence at Johnson County Community College and playing several concerts. So that's something that's really exciting. We're also going to be working with the Youth Symphony of Kansas City, which I'm really excited about because I was a member of that Youth Symphony growing up. Let's see, other things that are going on. Our American Wild Ensemble group has a program of music that is about the Great Lakes region, and we're going to be playing that program at a couple different locations at Eastman over the summer. I teach at a camp for high school and college students called Eastman Cello Institute, and I'm going to be presenting this Great Lakes program while in Rochester for the Eastman Cello Institute, and then also in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and a few other places over the next year or so. American Wild Ensemble just last week did a program celebrating the legacy of Frederick Law Olmsted in partnership with the Landscape Music Network. And we're going to be doing that program again in August in Rochester at Highland Park, which is another Olmsted designed park. The Cello Teaching Repertoire Consortium this year is commissioning Malcolm Parson, who is a cellist and composer. He was a member of the Turtle Island String Quartet and the Carolina Chocolate Drops, and he has like a really deep roots in string Americana and jazz, and he's writing a very cool concert etude for cello and piano that's sort of inspired by taking a journey down the Mississippi River and seeing like a lot of different kinds of styles of music over the course of this probably 7-minute journey. That's going to be at a Suzuki Book 5 to 6 level that I'm really excited about sharing with people. Those are a few of the things that are coming up that are pretty exciting.
Wow, excellent, outstanding. Well, best of luck with all of that, and whatever other projects come along, or just sometimes it's interesting to see the doors that suddenly open and opportunities for further just new connections in these ways. I'm hats off to what you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to talk about some of these things. I'm sorry, it can be a little bit long-winded.
Great.
But thank you for inviting me to chat about some of these things on your show. And I'm, really impressed by your show. I think that this kind of thing, especially in, a time where there's less traveling or less collaboration, to be able to connect with people is just so incredibly valuable. And I've enjoyed watching several episodes of your show, and really appreciate the service that you're doing for the music community by just wanting to connect with people and share a lot of things that lots of different cellists are doing, and some of the great things that you're doing also.
Well, terrific. Well, thank you, Professor Ketter. And
Thank you so much.
Happy practicing to all of you out there all weekend and week long, and we'll see you next Friday. Bye-bye.